The pearl of the Indian Ocean, Sri Lanka is a beautiful island where its history goes back to 3,000 years, which brings out a strong cultural heritage. Sri Lanka's geographic location and its deep harbours have made it of great strategic importance. By the time of independence, Sri Lanka had a rich economy and had managed to maintain one of the highest levels of economic prowess in Asia. Agriculture made a great contribution to the economy, while traditional tree crops such as tea, rubber and coconuts grown on state-owned plantations focused exportation. Sri Lanka was, for all intents and purposes, self-sufficient. The most significant change in Sri Lanka's economic structure occurred with the development of export processing industries, allowing Sri Lanka to have a strong foothold in the garment industry, which boasts one of the highest quality textiles in the South Asian region. All of this is a testament that we as a nation had tremendous potential for a prosperous future. Unfortunately, we have failed to maintain this momentum of the country's progress that it had achieved at the start of the century, where Sri Lanka is still struggling as a developing country, indicating that we have indeed made mistakes along the way. Where development had occurred, it has been limited to a minute section of the country, contributing to the increasing inequality. We as a nation have overcome colonial oppression, civil wars and natural disasters of great magnitude. But today, we face our biggest challenge yet, escaping the trench of being a developing nation where we have been trapped in for decades. This leads us to the discussion today, dilemmas on economic development and way forward for sustained economic growth in Sri Lanka. We have invited two distinguished personalities who will provide their opinions from two different perspectives. Mr. Kumudu Vivawardana from the Office of Cabinet of Ministers and Dr. Nayana Dehigama, who is the Chairman and Managing Director of Epic Technologies Group. With that introduction of our panelists, we will move on to the discussion.
This is my first question for Mr. Kumudu Veerawardana. Talking about Sri Lanka and our economy, it's not a secret that we have had better days following the colonial era and that our was ahead in multiple dimensions compared to most of the other countries at that time. But sadly, that is not the case now. Would you agree? And what do you think caused this downturn and when exactly did this downturn start?
Thank you. Thank you for the interesting question. First, I must say that I am not representing the government here. What I state here is totally based on my personal experiences and personal views as a public servant engaged in the policy making process for the last 9 years. Your question has three parts. The first part asks whether I agree with the statement that Sri Lanka has experienced economic development downturn during the post-independence period. And the second part asks for the reasons, if I agree with the first. And further, your question asks when this has started or what was the turning point. Well, I agree with the statement. Yes, we started well. Our initial conditions were really good. We inherited a well-established and organized export sector from the British and stable macroeconomy. Our education level was really good, and we had a good civil service to facilitate the economic development. Uh, with these initial favorable conditions, actually, Sri Lanka was believed to become one of the model post colonial nations in Asia. But after 7 decades since the independence, we are still a developing nation with a GDP per capita of 4,000 US dollars or less than that. Uh, yes, we are still doing better among our South Asian neighbors in terms of GDP per capita and Human Development Index. But look at our high performing Southeast Asian counterparts. They were behind us in 1950s, but they have successfully managed to manage their economic transformation and are doing really well today while we are struggling. So what went wrong? When did we lose the race? My understanding is that there are multiple reasons for this, but above all, the policy errors that we made has been very crucial. Second, we keep delaying much needed structural reforms. Third, internal conflicts. These internal conflicts have ruined our anticipated growth prospects target or prospects or growth targets, particularly in 97 period, which has contributed to this current downfall. If you take 1948 to 1997, 1948 to 1977 period, we followed welfare-oriented inward-looking policies. So our welfare budget was massive. We had not only free education or free health, we had even a subsidized rice program. So we provided rice for a concessionary price. And on the other hand, 90% of our export income came from traditional plantation goods such as tea, rubber, and coconut. So we couldn't diversify our export sector until we promoted our apparel sector in early 1990s. On the other hand, our imports were mainly food items and not investment goods. For example, rice imports represented about 25% of our imported bill during that time. This has created a big foreign exchange issue, and our answers were import substitution in agriculture and import substitution in industry. Our policy choice should have been promoting export-oriented agriculture or export-oriented industry. Actually, Singapore did that, Malaysia did that, South Korea did that, and they have succeeded in that. Finally, we liberalized our economy in 1997, but we couldn't deliver expected results due to lack of long-time vision, policy inconsistency, huge welfare expenses, and export pessimism and other internal conflicts. So, in my view, our present bad economic performance is a logical result of our past policy errors and delaying structural reforms contributed by internal conflicts. And it happened over several decades, so I can't find an exact turning point. So that's my answer for your first question.
Mr. Kumudu, as someone who is involved in the policy making process, what do you think we could have done differently in the past, and what do you think we should do now to get us back on the right track towards a sustainable economic development?
Yes, obviously we could have done better. We should have diversified our exports and promoted export-oriented industries like Singapore did. In his book From Third World to First, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, the former Prime Minister of Singapore, explains how he started Singapore's export-oriented industrialization with an unskilled labor force and very insignificant local market. They facilitated investments for export-oriented industries such as manufacturing and assembling electronic items, small machineries, and gradually they increased the value addition component of local value addition. That helped them keep their unskilled citizens employed, which is very important at the initial stage of the economic development of a poor country. They also utilized their geographical location. They promoted their port and industries such as bunkering and petroleum products. As their workforce became skilled and educated, they attracted in the service sector firms like banks and financial companies that made their service sector more vibrant. And today they have a very diversified economy and they have a knowledge economy. So we could have taken the same path as Singapore did, instead of picking those inward looking economic policies. So unfortunately, until 1977, we had channeled all our resources to this agriculture sector, and institutions owned by public or the government, basically manufacturing firms, and we channeled all these resources to those import substitution industries owned by the government. These protectionist policies made our agriculture sector and local industries inefficient and less competitive. So they lost the battle when the economy was liberalized in 1977. In my opinion, we have to introduce structural reforms to achieve sustainable economic development. We can go for public funded education and healthcare system instead of this costly and less productive free education and free health system. So we have a big skills mismatch in our labor market because our educational institutions underprovide training that the firms demand. And our agriculture sector contributes less than 10% of our GDP, but it employs more than 25% of our workforce. We need reforms that increase productivity in that sector as well. And also, international trade and utilizing our geographical location would be very important. We have to understand how global production sharing works and plug our manufacturers into those global supply chains. The components of a Boeing aircraft, for example, are made in 43 countries because it's profitable to do so. That's basically because of the comparative advantage, and we have to focus on our comparative advantage. And we can't make a car and brand it. It's very difficult, but we can easily make a particular component for Toyota at a globally competitive price. For example, we can make tires. There are companies already in Sri Lanka that make sensors for Toyota cars and Airbus. So our location is, on the other hand, a great advantage. We are close to fast-growing economies such as India, Bangladesh, and China, and we are located in the middle of the naval route that connects Europe and Asia. So our ports have a great potential and great potential to contribute to our economic development. Uh, Further, we Europe and Asia. So our ports have a great potential and great potential to contribute to our economic development. Uh, Further, we have to keep in mind that our 75% of our labor force is employed in the SME sector, not in big companies. So we have to support SMEs to climb up to the next level, and they become big companies, and we have to support them to be globally competitive at the next level. So those are my thoughts. What I want to emphasize here is we need reforms and have to pick correct policies with with consistency.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumudu Vivavardhana, for your opinions and your valuable suggestions. It is certain that we have to take an alternative approach in developing the nation and rise with holding a strong economy. Speaking of a strong and powerful economy, we would like to take a turn to a different perspective on how SMEs and entrepreneurs can uplift the standards of the country. There is no doubt that entrepreneurship is one of the key factors which directs a nation towards sustainable economic growth. Therefore, understanding the requirements of entrepreneurship is of utmost importance for a developing economy. To build opinion from an entrepreneur's perspective, we will discuss this further with Dr. Naina Dahigam.
Looking back at the glory days, Sri Lanka used to be a country that others look up to and had an economy that others strive to reach. Do you feel that Sri Lanka has moved forward or stay at the same place or even move backward while the world has steadily moved forward around us? And do you feel that we have neglected the importance of SMEs and entrepreneurship along the way?
Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of Singapore, came to Sri Lanka in 1956, and he made a target to develop Singapore in par with Colombo. That is the target that he set. But after many years, what has happened to Sri Lanka and what has happened to Singapore? Singapore's GDP today has gone beyond $375 billion, whereas our GDP is about $85 billion. Singapore's per capita income is about $90,000, whereas our per capita income is about $3,800. Even if you look at other countries around us, like Korea, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, and all these countries have gone far beyond Sri Lanka in terms of development. So, where have we gone wrong is a question. Of course, we got our independence in 1948, and we are boasting about a history of 73 years of independence. But what have we achieved? Is this the development that we all wanted to have? So, this is the question that we have to ask. So, if you think that this is what we wanted to achieve, I think we are mistaken badly and sadly, because all other nations have gone beyond their expectations except Sri Lanka and few other countries in this region. So it is very much important for us to understand as to why we are lagging behind compared to other nations around us. My belief is that our administrators, our political leadership lack entrepreneurship. That is the reason, or probably one of the main reasons, as to why a country cannot develop the way its people want to be. We all have adopted certain bureaucratic measures to govern the country without adopting the qualities of entrepreneurship and looking beyond the window and how we basically can develop the nation with all other parameters in it. We may have implemented or adopted all these governance policies, administrative practices in a bureaucratic manner, not an entrepreneurial manner. That is where I believe that the country has gone wrong. Now, if you look at the ease of doing business, I think if I can remember, we are 99th among 170 countries in the world. So, which means it's so difficult for the industries or the entrepreneurs to sustain in a country like this because there are so much of hostilities that we have created because of the bureaucratic approach by different political parties, different political leaders in this country. Without allowing the trade to happen freely, without allowing industries to function freely, they have brought so much of policies which are stringent. They have brought so much of practices and laws which are hindrance to the industries and trade. So that is one of the main reasons as to why the Sri Lanka has not gained or reached the development goals as it wanted to be. So that is something that we have to remember. There are a few fundamentals that are essential for development of any nation. Development of a nation does not come only by creating wealth or only by improving the income. First, you have to develop the people, the social aspect of the people, and also the cultural aspect of the people. If there is no cultural and social well being in a country, you cannot actually call that a developed nation. Also, there have to be environmental sustainability. The environment have to be protected, and people have to have clean water, clean air, sanitization, and various other environmental requirement, the infrastructure, access to communication, transportation, all these things have to be basically provided as parameters of development. Then also the economic aspect of it, the wealth creation, the per capita income of the people, the amount that they can save, their income, basic income, and how much they can spend for their basic needs, and the wealth that they can actually create. All these things also have to be basically should be considered for development. Then, especially also the governance aspect of it, right? How the government, both the political leadership as well as the government administration, facilitate countries' trade and industry, and how you facilitate them to create wealth for them as well as for others. Those are the areas that have to be basically considered and also facilitated or protected or improved in order to achieve a sustainable development of a country. So, in order to do that one, it is very essential that the government or the administrators should adopt entrepreneurship. What is entrepreneurship? We have to understand what is entrepreneurship is. Entrepreneurship is your liking, your ability, your passion, or your courage to adopt the innovations. That is entrepreneurship. Is not doing business only. Entrepreneurship is your ability or your love, your enthusiasm to adopt innovation for continuous improvement. Do something differently, creatively, so that you can actually create more wealth or more revenues through that one, right? So, as we know, if you look at an organization, any organization to survive, you have to grow. If you don't grow, the organization will die. So, in order to adopt growth or assure growth, organizations have to adopt innovations. Without innovations, you cannot actually grow any organization. This principle is valid even for the country. Even the country, if the country cannot adopt change or adopt innovations for continuous improvement, that country cannot actually sustain. I mean, it will only go down, not go up. So therefore, adoption of this innovation have to be basically uh, facilitated and taken care of, right? Otherwise, the country will not be able to basically develop. So now, if you look at actually how much the government is basically investing in innovations, or to facilitate our innovation, it is if you look at even numbers, or the quantum of money that they invest in facilitating those innovators are very very minimum, right? Because the government has many other priorities other than supporting innovators to facilitate innovations, right? Now, as I know, I have noted in the sense, the revenues or the income of the government, the 90% of the income of the government is used to pay the salaries of government officers, and they are left with 10% of their income to pay for all other infrastructure requirements, education, healthcare, innovations, and all the other things. So the government is feeding the government sector employment, right? And then in return, what have you got? If you look at even the government institution, the efficiency of those government institutions, I mean, just imagine spending 90% of the government revenue on the government institution, but still the services that we get from the government servants or the government services is far below our expectation. But instead, government has paid very little attention to support research, support innovation, support the creations. So, as a nation, we are only worried about feeding our government sector and then taking care of that one. But instead, they have actually neglected the importance of innovations or adopting innovation for the development of the nation. So the entrepreneurship factor has basically not been adopted by the government or all the governments that we have seen in the history. That is one of the main reasons as to why the country cannot actually develop as per the pace that we all wanted, or in par with the pace the other countries around us are developing. So this is where I think we should address, or the governments should address.
Entrepreneurship is known to be the engine of economic growth. Can entrepreneurship and development of SMEs be the solution for our economy? Also, how can we as a nation achieve economic growth and sustainable economic development through the entrepreneurial thinking?
SMEs, small and medium enterprises, are very important aspect for any uh, national or the economic development. Why? Because as we know, 60 to 70% of the GDP is serviced by the SME sector. So SMEs are the entities that are run by the entrepreneurs. So, which means the entrepreneurs are the most important factor for economic development or economic sustainability of any nation. So, the supporting the entrepreneurs to run their trade and run their enterprises are extremely important for any nation or any country to stabilize or sustain their economic development. But unfortunately, what is happening today is that the entrepreneurs are getting very disturbing signals due to ever changing or fast or rapidly changing policies of the government, right? As you may have experienced that over the past many months, there had been so many policy changes, policy decisions have been basically taken, and over months, those policy decisions have been basically changed to another one. So entrepreneurs are people generally have a long-term vision, and then they have a plan, and then they execute their plan according to certain steps, right? But when we as entrepreneurs start uh, marching towards a direction with a plan, and suddenly after a few months, if you find that all these policies are being changed, and of course that becomes a huge hindrance or an obstacle to the development of the progress of that entrepreneur, because you cannot run your businesses because you don't know what the policy is going to be in the future. So that has been the practice in the history of our country. Now, either they change their policies when the minister concerned changes, or the government changes, or now, uh, you can see that sometimes those policies are being changed almost every month, like. So none of the entrepreneurs can plan for their future. So which is a huge hindrance or huge problem for a country like us, because the entrepreneurs are the most important people, and if they don't function properly, and then you will not be able to develop the economy. But if we are disturbed like this, and if they cannot actually sustain, the entire economy may go down. So therefore it's very important for the government to understand the need of an entrepreneur, of the enterprises, think like an entrepreneur, and then adopt those entrepreneurial practices and policies into the administration, so that you basically support the entrepreneurs, support the enterprises, so that they will basically build the economy. The government cannot develop an economy alone. You need to have these SMEs, you need to have these entrepreneurs to support that one. Without them, you can't even think of basically making an economy sustainable. So that is where the issue is. If the government takes decisions, especially the political decisions that are affecting the entrepreneurs and the industries and the trade of the country, without the participation of the industry, without the participation of the entrepreneurs, without understanding their issues and the problems, right? And if the government is taking decisions based on their political motives, or within the closed doors, then of course that is going to hurt the economy badly. So this is where I think we have to basically may adopt those changes, in the sense, get or the inculcate entrepreneurship in the government administration or the political leadership, as well as the government sector, the government administration, which is very important for them to think like an entrepreneur, right? Now I have some experience that, of course, sometimes the practice of government servants is that they look at entrepreneurs like the people who do crime. They think that the profit is a crime, so which is a very wrong idea. Profit is the most important thing for any organization, as well as for the country. Now, for any organization to survive and grow, there are few fundamental requirements. One, you have to make sure that you sustain a reasonable revenue. So revenue is alone is not enough. You have to make sure that there is reasonable profit embedded in the revenue. So revenue and profitability is also not enough. It is very important that you manage your cash flow positively. Because if you don't have cash flow, which means liquid that is coming into the organization, you will not be able to meet your day-to-day expenditure, your operational cost. So therefore, even if you have revenues and profits in paper, if you don't have positive cash flow, what happens is your organization will die. Right. So in order to do that, and you have to also grow. If you don't achieve growth, you are going to die. So growth also is a very important factor for organizational success. So in order to adopt growth or sustain or assure growth, you have to bring in innovation factor into the company, into the organization. Without innovations, you cannot grow. So all these five factors are very important to any organization. Similarly, all these five factors are extremely essential to a country or to a government also. Even the government have to think like that. Government have to build their revenue not by only imposing taxes, in a creative manner. How can they improve their government's revenue in a sustainable or creative manner without making it a burden to the entrepreneurs and the businesses? So the getting the revenue is number one, and also they have to make sure that there is sufficient profit in that revenue, instead of utilizing the entire revenue as cost of maintaining the government. You got to have that profitability so that you can invest those profits in a creative manner to facilitate the development of the country. Then you got also have to have a good the cash flow, which means you have to have a good current account balance, right? Import and export balance. So if you don't pay attention to that one, again the government will go into big trouble because you don't have sufficient foreign exchange to facilitate imports. So that's another issue. So like that, again, if you want to grow, then growth is another matter. If you want to grow, then you have to bring in the innovations factor. If the government does not support innovations, if the government does not invest sufficiently to facilitate innovators, then the innovations will not come. So then the government cannot actually achieve growth. So the government also government will not be able to actually sustain if the government does not pay the attention to the revenue, the profitability, cash flow, which is the liquid availability for the country, as well as the growth and innovation factor. So this is where the government or the administration have to basically pay attention to if you want to make this economic development sustainable. Without that, I have my doubt that the country can go any further in our development march.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nainu Behigama. Your perception and recommendations are indeed undoubtedly worthwhile. As for the essence of today's discussion, it is definite that Sri Lanka requires a major turnaround to set foot on the right track. In order to do so, according to the opinions of our panelists, it is vibrant that we need to diverse our exports and promote export-oriented industries while facilitating investments for those industries. Also, to bridge the gap between the mismatch of skills and education with the industrial demands, and to educate the workforce to become a skillful workforce, structural reforms in education are required. Meanwhile, policy reforms with consistency and the utilization of Sri Lanka's geographical location and its harbors for strategic advantage by entering the global supply chain could provide the direction on this path. Further, it was once again made clear that entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial thinking, and SMEs are of utmost importance. To facilitate SMEs and entrepreneurship of the nation, the government needs to implement consistent, supportive, and effective policy. Taking from the developed nations like Singapore and Korea, who were developing nations way before Sri Lanka, we too require a long-term strategic plan with entrepreneurial thinking, which brings out the real requirement of inculcating an entrepreneurial culture. Necessary for any organization, the government, and the nation to understand the fundamental requirements of revenues, profits, cash flows, growth, and innovation, which should be exploited sustainably and creatively to ensure sustainable economic growth and development. It is up to us as a nation and the authorities to decide whether to continue on the same path or to aggressively change for the betterment of Sri Lanka. Our discussion today ends leaving a question. What is the nation we're going to present to the next generation of Sri